Hello. I am doing story time a little bit earlier today because I've got another course. So we are now on chapter 11. I hope you're enjoying the last chapter, which I didn't actually read on YouTube. We saw that Joe visited the Queen and she wasn't quite what Joe expected. So that was quite a funny visit. And now we're going to move on to chapter 11. Off we go. And it's called School's Out. After circling the school field a couple of times, they landed with all the grace of a swan landing on a still pond. Well, one of them did. Joe crash-landed into a bush and Jenkins landed in a tree with all the style of a cannonball. One moment, Jenkins, we'll get you down, Joe said, staggering upright and pulling off his crash helmet to reveal what can only be described as some spectacular helmet hair. Oh, leave me, sir. You two go on, Jenkins muttered breathlessly. I'll just stay here and have a rest. It will give me a chance to reflect on where my life went so wrong. That is quite funny. Right, you are. We'll be back in an hour to take you home. Try not to get eaten by squirrels. By now, a large crowd of pupils had gathered in the school field, and Joe and AJ were greeted like rock stars. Joe held his arm aloft in an attempt to quieten the crowd. Fellow kids of the world, as you know, this is an important day in the history of our country, a day in which you get to be in charge of the teachers. We get to show them that having fun is as important as doing lessons. Good luck, comrades, and let the entertainment begin. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago Joe was too shy to even put his hand up in class. Now he was talking to hundreds of people without even thinking about it. Joe couldn't work out if he'd changed or if this was the real him. Mr. Brooks came scurrying onto the field with a look of wild terror in his eyes. Ah, Prime Minister, how wonderful for you to join us on this special day, Mr. Brooks said with a forced smile. You're just in time for, in fact, what are we doing today? Have you asked your pupils? That is kind of the point, said Joe. No, oh, what a good idea. Mr. Brooks. Sarcasm dial had been turned all the way up to 11. Any suggestions about what to do today? AJ shouted to the pupils. We could make stink bombs in science, one boy shouted. Excellent, Joe smiled. How about reading comics in English? A girl yelled. Brilliant. And what about this morning? Joe asked. We normally have PE, Mr. Brooks said. Then, oops, realizing that it was probably a mistake to open his mouth. Even better, Joe grinned. How about a game of teacher versus pupils? What shall we play? Football, someone yelled. No, netball, someone else shouted. No, cricket, another said. That settled it. We'll have a game of soccer, net, cricket, ball. Everyone apart from Mr. Brooks cheered madly. But I don't have my games kit, Mr. Brooks said. Joe and AJ shot him a glance. No, Mr. Brooks protested. It's undignified. You know the rules, Joe shrugged. 10 minutes later, the entire teaching staff were on the field. There was Mrs. Sanderson, the elderly home economics teacher, Mr. Pop, the eccentric maths teacher, who blinked and grinned in the bright sunshine, as though this was the first time he'd ever been on a sports field in his life, and Mr. Peters, the PE teacher, who was busying himself doing all kinds of complicated stretching exercises. They were all dressed in what could be scavenged from the lost property box, all except Mr. Brooks, who had been made to do PE in his pants and vest. At either end of the field, there were 2 netball hoops, and in between them, 300 very excitable students. AJ had assigned himself referee. Are we ready? AJ yelled. But what are the rules? Mr. Brooks asked. I don't know, AJ smiled. But you're the referee. Surely there must be rules. Everyone needs rules. Rules are good. Rules are safe. Let's just start and see what happens, said AJ, grinning and wiggling his eyebrows up and down. I hate this game already, Mr. Brooks sighed. AJ raised his arm and blew his whistle. Beep! Joe ran from the middle of the field with the ball and charged towards the net, screaming at the top of his voice. Wah! Handball, Mr. Brooks yelled. Yellow card, AJ shouted. Ha! Yellow card to you, Mr. Brooks. What for? Telling the ref what to do. Any more of that and you'll have to do a forfeit. Meanwhile, Joe was hurtling towards the net, the ball tucked under his arm. He had his mind on one thing and one thing only, a hoop goal. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, a blur flashed towards him. The next thing Joe felt was air being forced from his lungs as he was knocked to the ground in a heap. Mrs. Sanderson, a woman who must have been in her 70s, had full-on rugby tackled Joe, causing him to spill the ball. Oh my goodness. In your face, she screamed at Joe before walloping the ball upfield. I mean, hard luck, Prime Minister. Good tackle, Mrs. S, Joe smiled, pulling himself to his feet. The ball hurtled towards Mr. Brooks. He was just about to hit it with his cricket bat when he looked up and noticed 300 of his students charging his way. Mr. Brooks gulped and closed his eyes as every boy and girl in the school, as well as a few teachers, piled on. There was a muffled cry of, "Don't hurt me," as Mr. Brooks disappeared under a mountain of bodies. AJ blew his whistle sharply and waved his arms about a lot. Finally, Mr. Brooks emerged, looking dazed and confused. "Orange card," AJ yelled at the head teacher. "What did I do this time?" Mr. Brooks said, spitting grass out of his mouth. "Inciting violence and, offside? Oh, this game is stupid. Purple card for being rude to the game. Forfeit time," AJ smiled. "You have to run around the outside of the field singing, 'I'm a silly sausage' for 20 minutes. Mr. Brooks finally snapped. He broke the cricket bat over his knee and stormed off around the field. 30 minutes now, AJ yelled. There's an extra 10 points deducted for being mean to a cricket bat. Violetta's home was on the other side of London in a bleak part of the city. It was on the sort of street where no one goes after dark, where it's cold and lonely, and the only sounds are people walking quickly away. This was where Violetta was happiest, a place where she could be alone with her grisly thoughts. Oh, it's changed to Violetta's home. Violetta sat on a worn armchair in her lounge. The curtains were drawn and only lights came from the blue glow of the huge bank of TV screens fixed to the wall in front of her. Each one beamed news from around the world, and they all had Joe's face on them. He was now the most famous boy in the world. Violetta reached for a bottle on the side table and poured herself a large scotch. The very sight of Joe made her skin scratchy with rage. Why wasn't she on every TV channel in the world? Why wasn't it her who everyone wanted to be seen with? Why? She turned up the volume on one of the screens to drown out the questions whirring around in her brain. The new Prime Minister has been at it again, this time at his old school, the news reporter was saying. He took time out from his busy schedule to bring laughter and silliness to the pupils of St. Peter's, as well as inventing a new sport. In a couple of days, the park that Joe Perkins wanted to save is going to reopen, bigger and better than before. Violetta pressed pause and rewound. Silliness, and again silliness. It was all too much for her to take, and she grabbed the first thing she laid on her hands on and threw it at the bank of TVs on the wall, causing it to explode with a loud pop and shattering of glass. Drat! Violetta screamed, realizing she'd once again destroyed her phone. I can't take much more of this. I need a plan. I need to teach Perkins a lesson. I need to end this silliness now, she muttered, fiddling with the brooch on her blouse. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She grabbed a pen and paper and began to scribble frantically. I'm going to need a sharp pin, a fake dog poo, a set of screwdrivers, some wire cutters, banners, a few placards, a legion of miserable people. She laughed to herself. Ha ha, sometimes I scare myself. I'll give you a grand reopening that you won't forget, Perkins. The final score was teachers 234 runs and pupils 606562. Man of the match, or rather woman of the match, went to Mrs. Sanderson, who scored 4 conversions and 2 wickets. Took 5 wickets and tackled like a woman possessed. Jenkins, who'd been watching the whole game from up the tree, clapped both teams politely. Excellent game, Prime Minister, Jenkins said, as Joe and AJ helped him down. Just then, the sound of screeching tyres pierced the air, and the Prime Ministerial car pulled up in a cloud of smoke. Prime Minister, I'm afraid you're needed, Stephen said, winding down his window. I've come to escort you to the airport immediately. Jenkins turned his phone on and scrolled through a bank of messages messages urgently. His tone was serious. It's awful news. It looks as though the world may be on the brink of war, and you may be the only person who can stop it. And that is going to be the next chapter. Oh my goodness, I wonder what's happening, and I wonder what Joe is going to do to save the world from a war. Exciting. So that will be tomorrow, chapter 12. I shall see you then, my friends. Oh, I'm excited. I wanted to read ahead, but I'm not going to. I'll wait till tomorrow. See you tomorrow, superstars.